Hey, Lassamia students. To begin today, I want you to check in with yourself. How are you doing? What words would you use to describe the emotions that you're experiencing today? Recently, I've had conversations with many of you and other people in my life all around the same theme. We feel heavy. Some feel angry, some sad, some anxious or confused, but we all feel heavy. And there's so much to grieve. Whether it be violence in our neighborhood, police brutality across the country, racism, feeling lonely or anxious, difficult circumstances in our families, and so much more. The list can go on and on. There is so much to grieve. Recently, we've been talking about how these things are not as God intended them to be. When God created, God intended for there to be shalom, right relationship between God, self, others, and creation. But we saw how we took control and we chose not to trust God, and death entered the world. Shalom was no longer present. But we've told many stories that have shown us how God has, throughout history, been moving closer to us and trying to reestablish shalom. But it's clear that there's still so much that needs to be done. I want to talk with you about who God is and what God invites us to do as we travel through life and have these very difficult circumstances happen to us. The story I want to tell you today took place at the time of exile. So, to remind you from last year we talked about the exile. We talked about how Israel had many bad kings and that there were prophets who told the people to turn around, to repent. But the people and the kings didn't repent, and so they went into exile, which is actually what the prophets told them would happen if they didn't turn around. And the exile was horrible. We had an exile of our own, if you can remember, and you all used words like feeling vulnerable and afraid and uncertain and scared when you described your experience of being in exile. Now, today I want to tell you a little bit more of that story. I'm going to tell it to you from the perspective of a woman who was there when Jerusalem was taken over by the Babylonians. We used to be a great nation. Jerusalem, our capital city, was filled with people. I've heard stories of the impressive days under King David's military leadership and King Solomon's economic leadership. According to the stories passed down to my family, Israel had become a superpower that at the end of their leadership, Israel was one of the most powerful and wealthiest nations in the ancient Near East. But today, we're nothing. To give you a little bit more context, after King David and King Solomon, we had bad kings and they split our nation into two. And both nations were led by bad kings, and God raised up prophets to warn us to turn from our evil ways, to repent. But we didn't listen. My ancestors continued in their evil ways. We continued in our evil ways. And the prophets warned us that if we didn't turn, if we didn't repent, that we would go into exile. And here we are now. We didn't listen, and we are in exile. Now, the northern kingdom was conquered first by the Assyrians, and now the southern kingdom where I'm from, we've been conquered by the Babylonians. And I hoped that maybe Jerusalem would be able to make it, our city, our hope. But as of today, Jerusalem has fallen. This great city, the city of God's peace, is no more. We are nothing. We have nothing left. We are completely devastated. The Babylonians were horrible conquerors. They tore down our wall, our temple. They looted our temple of our gold, our silver, our metal. They burnt our fields and our crops. They put salt over our crops so we could grow nothing more. They took our kings, prophets, priests, those with able bodies, those who were intelligent, with them into Babylon. And they left us who were weak, who were the most marginalized in the city. They left widows like me, orphans, people with disabilities, people who are sick, to just suffer here and die. They wanted to do everything to make sure that we could never rise to power again. Each of these things to make sure that we would always be inferior to them. How can I make sense of this? Out of the depths of my heart, oh God, I cry to you. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, oh Lord, how long? Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide in times of trouble? See, God, how distressed I am. I am in torment within, and in my heart I am disturbed. People have heard my groaning, but there is no one to comfort me. My groans are many, and my heart is faint. After hearing this story, I want to ask you 3 questions. The first is, what happened in this story? Why was the main character upset? And then think about, how did this story end? I'm going to leave the questions up so you can read them and think about them. This woman lamented. She cried out to God, asking questions like why and how long. These questions can be scary to ask. Will God think I don't have any faith? Will people think the same? I want to encourage you to ask these questions. I wholeheartedly believe that they are questions of great faith. To show you what I mean, I want to tell you a scenario. So let's pretend that you saw me get offended. Someone said something mean to me. If I don't trust you, how might I respond? I'm probably going to try to act all tough, try to make it seem like I'm not hurt or bothered. But if I do trust you, how would that look different? I'll probably tell you about what I'm feeling, how what the person said to offend me makes me feel sad or insecure or angry. In the same way, when you lament to God, when you pray in this way, you get to do the same. You get to tell God your emotions, your questions, your desires. God gets to hear you, and you ask God to move, to bring change. This is one of the best practices and is exactly what we need as we weather this world and its many challenges. We need to be able to go to God with honesty, raw, able to tell God exactly how we're doing and feeling, knowing that it is an act of trust. So we're going to try this together. I'd like you to think about your answers to these different questions. You can do whatever is best for you. You can grab a piece of paper and write down words or answers or sentences. You can journal, you can draw pictures, or you can just sit and think. But I want you to answer, what things have been heavy on your heart? What has made you sad, mad, or anxious recently? What questions do you have for God about what's happening around you, and what do you desire? Share your emotions with God. Present your questions. God invites you to draw near in these things. Typically, laments, they have the 2 common beginnings of the sentences. It's how long and why. You can even ask, how long will, and then whatever it is that's burdening your heart. How long will there be violence? How long will families separate? How long will I be lonely and anxious? How long will all of these things? Or you might ask, why? Why, God, is there violence in the city? Why is there police brutality? Why is there racism? Why? Present your questions, your emotions to God. The good news is that God does draw near to those who suffer. We see examples of this time and time again throughout the scriptures, and I've seen this in my own life too. We know that God is a compassionate God. The word compassion actually means to suffer with. God is compassionate. God suffers with us as we suffer. There's so much more to say, but today I just want to give you this tool to go to God and lament in a prayer of expressing your grief and questions, knowing that God listens and that this is an act of trust in God as you do this. Lassamia students, I care about you so much. I pray for you often, and I will be praying for you as you move through this lesson. I want you to know that we at Lassamia are people who care about you and want to walk with you in the things that make your hearts heavy, that we want to journey with you in life. And so do know that you have people here who can process with you and walk with you, and you'll be in my thoughts and prayers as you process these things.